morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kamran Anwar. I live and work in London, but have the pleasure of coming to Lahore. And this time it is to explore some of the unknown and oft-forgotten sites of this wonderful metropolis. As you know, Lahore has been the seat of the Ghaznavid Empire and saw its glory during the Mughal rule for 250 years. And we're going to explore many of the sites and sounds of Lahore. So please join me on this great road trip through the hidden treasures of Lahore. So located on the historic Grand Trunk Road is the mausoleum of Dai Anga. Dai in Urdu or Farsi is a wet nurse. Dai Anga was the wet nurse of Emperor Shah Jahan. And we are sitting here at her mausoleum, which has been built in what was originally one of the many gardens of Imperial Lahore. And this was the Gulabi Bagh. It was a square rose garden. And the main entrance that you saw was built in 1650. And you saw these wonderful Kashikari work, which is work from Kashan. And then these wonderful frescoes that are inspired by Italian fresco painting. The Gulabi Bagh was built in 1650, which is right in the middle of Emperor Shah Jahan's rule, who ruled the Mughal Empire for 30 years from 1628 to 1658. A word or two about Shah Jahan. So by the time Emperor Shah Jahan came to the royal throne and he was done with his period, this was the largest empire in the world, ladies and gentlemen. 25% of the world GDP was controlled by the Mughal Empire during the time of Shah Jahan. And this particular mausoleum was then later repurposed in 1671. When Dai Anga died, she was buried here. We are now standing at the Suruwala Maqbara, which is the cypress tomb in English of a woman called Nissa Begum, who was the sister of Nawab Zakaria Khan, the governor of Lahore. And this tomb was built in 1738, so we earlier visited Dai Anga. So we are looking at a period of almost 75 to 100 years. And this is built in an interesting way, right? I mean, they say that Nissa Begum would come here, climb a ladder up 16 feet, where she would recite the Quran and just meditate and get away from the imperial environments. And when she died, she was buried here in a parda. So she was buried in a way that not everyone can reach that tomb. I also wish to point out these wonderful cypress trees on the tomb. The cypress tree has been used as a symbol of beauty and has been used as also a symbol of eternity. And you know, these wonderful cypress trees on the structure behind me, they appear in Mughal miniature paintings, they appear in Persian carpets. In fact, they appear in poetry. So much before then, there's Samir Khusro said, using the cypress tree as a symbol of beauty, Pari paikar nigare sarv qadde lala rukhsare, Pari paikar nigare sarv qadde lala rukhsare, Sarapa afate dil booj shab jaye ke manbudam. That her beauty like a fairy, and tall, sarf is in Persian and Urdu is the cypress. We now arrive at this little gem and marvel of South Asian subcontinental architecture called the Coast Minar. And there were many of these little gems dotted across this region all the way to Delhi and further afield. And Kos is the Mughal measurement of distance, and between one Kos and another is just a little under 3 kilometers. I remember my father saying that ye 2 Kos dur hai ya 3 Kos dur hai, and the famous Urdu phrase wo to koson dur chale gaye comes from this Kos. The Kos Minars are about 30 feet high, and the other interesting fact is that no one Kos Minar was identical to the other. There were minor differences in the beautification of these structures. Initially, they were put in place by Sher Shah Suri in the 16th century. जहाँ में अहले ईमा सूरत खुर्शीद जीते हैं, जहाँ में अहले ईमा सूरत खुर्शीद जीते हैं, इधर डूबे उधर निकले, उधर डूबे इधर निकले. The couplet by Iqbal, who talks about people of resilience, people of faith. And we are sitting by the mausoleum of a slave who eventually became a king, Qutbuddin Aibak, the first Muslim king of India, the progenitor of the Delhi Sultanate. He was also known as Lakh Baksh, perhaps given his own background of difficulty that he saw. He was an extremely benevolent ruler. He gave a lot of alms and charity, and therefore Lakh Baksh is a phrase that is used for him. He died in 1210 or thereabouts, a lover of polo. He fell from his polo horse and the stirrup has appeared to have pierced him, and he died and he is buried here. So Qutbuddin Aibak, here to pay respects. And it's in the bustling streets of Anarkali. The actual tomb here, the structure of this tomb is later. It's actually in the 60s or 70s that it was made at the behest of Hafiz Jalandhari. But inside the tomb, the grave is of Qutbuddin Aibak. The Park Tea House, which was originally the India Tea House, formed in 1940 by a Sikh family. And Park Tea House became the hub of the progressive writers movement of the country in the 40s and 50s. And I was just looking at my phone and seeing all the great writers who were here, and the list reads who's who. Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Ahmed Faraz, Sahir Ludhianvi, Josh Malihabadi. The list goes on. Some of the most phenomenal writers and thinkers of our time. A must visit to anyone coming to Lahore. A cup of cardamom tea and their lovely chicken sandwiches at the Park Tea House. Lahore bustled with art and culture in the early 20th century as it does today. And in the milieu of that environment, there once lived in 1941 a profoundly important woman artist who was of both Indian and Hungarian descent, Amrita Shergill. Amrita Shergill was born in 1913, spent her early childhood here and had the last few years of her life in Lahore as well. And we are standing here at number 23 Sir Gangaram Mansions, which is where she lived and died. And some of her later works were painted. Her studio is right up there on the second floor of this building, and she would have a view of this street from the window of her studio. Amrita Shergill had lived and worked across the world in Paris, she was in Turkey, she was in Simla, she was in Calcutta. She studied at École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And when the history books are written and rewritten on the history of subcontinental art of the 20th century, Amrita Shergill's name is singular in its distinction and singular in its quality, especially given that she died merely at the age of 28. Whenever you visit Lahore, stopping by at 23 Sir Gangaram Mansions to see where Amrita spent the last years of her life and died, I think is quite important. Kaukab-e-Iqbal-e-Punjab was one of the higher honors that Maharaja Ranjit Singh would give to the most important men of his state. And one such recipient was a Frenchman who had fought alongside Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. Once defeated, he found himself in Persia, where he learnt Farsi and eventually landed in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court to be promoted ultimately to be the General of the Cavalry, General Jean-Francois Alart. He is buried here in Lahore in Old Anarkali, and he was known to be not only an able army officer, a leader, but also a very charming and a gentle individual. Fell in love with the daughter of the Raja of Chamba, and she was also a niece of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And from her he had 7 half French, half Indian children. He moved them to France. One of his daughters remained here. In 1839, General Alart died in Peshawar, and he was buried here along with his daughter who had predeceased him with full military honors. And I thought we must come here to General Alart's tomb to show how such a rich and diverse group of cultures and people have traversed this city, including some notable Frenchmen. We talked earlier about the golden age of Mughal architecture under the patronage of Emperor Shah Jahan. And it was in 1646 that this wonderful structure behind me was made, the Chobaji. As I had said earlier, Lahore was a city of gardens, and luscious gardens were dotted all across the city, and the entrance to one of the big gardens was the Chobaji Gate, which is where we are this bustling morning in Lahore. Chobaji was, according to some sources, was made at the behest of Princess Zeeba Nissa, who was the eldest daughter of Emperor Aurangzeb. The style of this building, I draw your attention to this syncretic style of architecture that takes Mughal and blends it with earlier Timurid styles and Middle Eastern styles. The cupolas at the top, the flaring cupolas, are unique in Mughal architecture. They're not seen anywhere else. Some scholars have argued that this was also influenced by the Minar in Hyderabad, Deccan. Behind this Chobaji, in tiny lanes, is what's called Choti Chobajis. There are three more gates, much smaller than this, little jewels that were the side and back entrances to this garden. You'll see the gorgeous Kashikari work here. Some of it has been restored. The structure stands proud in the city of Lahore, and obviously it's a must-see for anyone coming here to wanting to relish Mughal architecture. In Samnabad, on the busy and rather noisy Multan Road, lies a somewhat forlorn and certainly a forgotten Mughal monument, reputedly the tomb of Princess Zeeba Nissa, who was the eldest daughter of Emperor Aurangzeb. Women played an important role in the Mughal court, and often their accomplishments are not sufficiently celebrated. Princess Zeeba Nissa was a writer, a thinker, a scholar, a Sufi. She wrote under the takhallus or nom de plume of Makhafi. And for those of you who like and enjoy language, Makhafi comes from the word Khufia, or rather Khufia comes from the word Makhafi, which is the hidden one. She was a great favorite of her father's Emperor Aurangzeb, and whenever any prince or princess came of age, they were asked to spend time with Princess Zeeba Nissa. The unique feature of this structure is the pyramid-like dome. If you'll see, there's none other like that exists in the city. Most of the ornamentation of this structure is already gone. Purely it is at the Huzuri Bagh. That's where Ranjit Singh, when he used some of the materials from Mughal monuments, including this one. So Huzuri Bagh's ornamentation apparently, according to scholars, comes from here. What's still original is the floor. As you will see, it's made of something called Sange Badal. That is the original to the tomb. But other than that, the only thing that stands really is the structure. During the times when this was built in a garden, so this would have been built somewhere within the Chobaji Garden complex. This would have been an absolute jewel sitting there.